Thanks for choosing to rise up. I'm Dawn Ennis. Well, it's been a crazy October, and it's only just started. Right now, as you watch this, we're actually waiting to find out if the next Supreme Court justice is going to be seated or not. Whether you believe him or believe her, I only ask you to think about this. Why not believe the victim? What evidence do you need to doubt a woman? What evidence do you need to exonerate a man? What I think is happening right now in America is people are split along gender lines and along political lines. And what's interesting to me is that very few people have no opinion about this subject. Almost everyone has weighed in. And I welcome, even though this may be over by the time you watch this, I want to hear what you have to say. And we're looking for your comments at lifeafterdawn.com. Very special episode today. I have been looking forward to meeting Senator Beth Bye for the past 7 years. 7 years, Beth Bye has been a state senator. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She is Deputy Majority Leader. She is the chair of the Higher Education and Employment Advancement Committees. She was the vice chair, I believe, of the Board of Education in West Hartford for 5 years, where she was an instrumental part of the life of my spouse, Wendy Ennis. Wendy put a sign on our lawn, and I'm very proud to say that a sign saying, "Re-elect Beth Bye" is on my lawn now.
Nice.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
What's it like having to run all over again?
Well, it's good because it really gets you out. I'm out going door to door. I'm phone calling, people from the district randomly just to say hello and hear what's on their mind. And I have to say it's actually pretty heartening because at the Capitol, the people I talk to tend to be people who are having real challenges with government and their thorny problems, like with getting the proper health care they need, or a problem with DMV, or a problem with Department of Social Services getting their Medicaid approved. So by the time people come and talk to me, they're generally very aggravated. And so, we work to resolve those problems. But when I just go door to door, I meet so many people who just say, "Hey, thanks for your service." And I also hear about problems as well, and I hear, the concerns of people. So I think re-elections are critical.
I know that across America right now, there is a blue wave happening, or at least expected to be happening, in less than 5 weeks. We have a midterm election that could change the course of our national politics and our state government, including the governor's race. Tell me about the fact that you're an incumbent and so many people are in this mood to throw the bums out and make changes.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I do find that, when I started I first ran in 2001 and was on the school board. And back then, the media covered every single school board meeting in West Hartford. There was an article in the Hartford Courant. So the public could sort of follow and hear the policies we were working on and hear about when we were collaborating and working on things in a positive way. And I think the public had a much better view of what happens with public policy. And as an advocate for early childhood at the Capitol, before I was elected to anything, and I worked at Trinity College Child Center, it was the same thing. We'd be working on child care licensing regulations. And there'd be an article after every meeting of the Public Health Committee. So the public could see that the government was working on things to help them, to protect their water, to protect their children in child care, or whatever the case may be.
But there are fewer reporters now and fewer journalists.
Exactly. That's exactly where I'm going, which is now with so many fewer reporters and journalists, the papers cover two things, scandal and controversy, because people click on that. They love controversy. Like, nobody in my district would guess that I voted with the Republicans in the Senate 80% of the time, because all they hear about is the conflict. No one sees when we're in back rooms, like last year, working with the Republicans on a compromise that would allow undocumented immigrants, one in particular from West Hartford who was so instrumental, Gabby,
she's been a guest on our show.
To access financial aid that they pay into. Not federal financial aid, not state financial aid, but the financial aid fund that they actually pay into with their tuition. But, we worked with Republicans toward a compromise. So I'm afraid that what's happened over the past 6 or 7 years is when all people see is controversy and scandal, they think, oh my goodness, we've got to make a big change. And change is good. When I first ran, I was so upset with the way the school board was in West Hartford. It was very partisan. And I thought, that should not be a school board. I'm an early childhood educator. People need to learn to get along. So I ran because of change. People run because they want things to change, and it's been going on forever. What I worry about is people losing faith in our democracy because they can't see a full picture of it working.
And compromise has become a dirty word.
Well, compromise is not covered. Compromise, I think, is still really valued at the Capitol. I think, my ability with my colleagues and with colleagues on the other side of the aisle to reach across the aisle and even within my party to make compromise is something that makes me a really effective legislator.
It's what's happening in Washington, at least. It happened when Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona asked for a investigation into this whole Kavanaugh mess. How does the national debate filter down into your work in Connecticut?
Oh, it does very much. When I went door to door last week, this was very much on my constituents' minds. They want to know what I think about it as a judge of what are my priorities when they asked me about it. We were very frustrated last year because in the Connecticut General Assembly, we had a Time's Up Act. They got rid of the statute of limitations. That got through the Senate, but we couldn't get it through the House despite, senators like me meeting with House members and explaining the value of the bill. So these issues that are playing out in Washington also play out at the state level, and we have a role and I think a responsibility. On the heels of the Justice Kavanaugh situation and my work.
You said Justice Kavanaugh. Ooh.
On the statute. Well,
it looks like it's going to happen. He's a judge.
He's a judge.
Right.
Yeah, he's a judge.
It's likely he's going to become
in Connecticut,
justice.
We call them justice, so he's an appellate court justice. So I think that I did have a call from a constituent who was raped and waited 5 years to report it, and the statute of limitations doesn't allow her because of how long it took for it to go through the system. So this is stirring up cases where people are so frustrated, and we're hearing about it, and they say to us as their policymakers, what can you do for us?
Yeah. I'm a victim of sexual abuse.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I was 13, and I want people to know, if I can interrupt real quick, that at our website, laughafterdawn.com, there are resources. If you feel that you want to come forward, if you feel that you have no recourse and you want your story told, if you want to be believed, you can also reach out to me. I may not be able to help you, but I want to hear your story, and I think everyone's story must be told. Do you think this is a gender thing? Is this just men versus women, or victims versus people who are ignorant of sexual molestation?
I don't think it's a gender thing. There are so many men who are outraged, just like women are outraged. The proportion of outraged women is higher.
I know two women who don't believe Dr. Ford or other people.
Yeah.
They think that she's been paid off.
Yeah. Well, that again, that is where the distrust in government gets in the way of us having an effective democracy. And I'm afraid it's getting worse because, when people run those negative ads again and again, like if you're listening to the governor's race now, you'd think the only thing that mattered was taxes. There are so many critical issues in Connecticut. People care about gun safety. People are literally dying because they can't access health care and that the prices are going up. People care about those issues. People in Connecticut care so much about having great schools. When I go door to door in West Hartford, there are different stories depending on the age. But the parents say to me, I bought this house and moved here for the schools, and the schools are great, and I don't mind that my taxes are a little higher than somewhere else.
Because the schools are that much better.
But when you go to another door, say of a senior on a limited income that's not going up, they're saying these property taxes are driving me out of town. So I think as policymakers, we listen to both of those things. But when you have people spending tens of millions of dollars saying taxes are the only thing that matter and we've got to get rid of them all, it doesn't show any sense that we need a transportation infrastructure. We need high quality schools. There are people with developmental disabilities, 500 on a waiting list right now waiting for an appropriate living arrangement because we don't have the funds to pay for that. I think everyone in Connecticut believes that we should be taking care of people with disabilities, that senior citizens should have access to Medicaid, the Medicaid GAP program that allows them to have health care beyond exactly what Medicare covers, like most people do.
I would think that overwhelmingly taxes are a conservative Republican issue, but it is an issue, and let's just get it knocked out. Let's get it knocked out of the way, and we can move on. Where do we stand on taxes in terms of your role in the state Senate, and how do you envision the candidate you're supporting, Ned Lamont, being on taxes for Connecticut voters?
I think he has a really rational approach. He is not saying I'm coming in and raising taxes. He's going to look for efficiencies. He's going to, there are new ways of doing things. I don't think the average person understands that, while we've had a Democratic governor and a Democratic legislature, it's the first time the pensions were fully funded, ever, for the past 8 years. So we're in better shape. We're still not in good shape at all, and we need to fix it because past legislators and governors did not fully fund it, but we're getting there. The other big change is that this thing called a volatility cap, that if we get more revenue than expected, like we're getting now and we got last year, it automatically goes into our rainy day fund. And just this week, Moody said that's a positive for Connecticut. So we have to pay attention to the long-term obligations. Just today, Lamont talked about believing we should have some concessions related to how pensions are calculated if people work overtime, which I think virtually everyone in the state Senate agrees with, Democrat or Republican, that people deserve a pension and what they've paid into all those years, but the spiking has to go away on the local and the state level. So, I think he has a very balanced, rational approach. But you can't get the message out because there's not enough news, and Stefanowski will not even talk to the reporters. They're so frustrated. And all he does is run this one ad again. So I think we're deceiving the public with those kinds of ads. And
we, meaning GOP.
We meaning politicians who run negative ads all the time. Their point is they want to suppress the vote. They don't want people to vote. They want them to be so disgusted that they don't vote. And it works, but it's also undermining people's trust in our government, and that undermines our democracy. So we've got to insist that people talk about the issues like gun safety and bump stocks,
which just became against the law.
Just became against the law, but people need to know that Joe Markley, who's running for lieutenant governor with Stefanowski, was the only person in the state Senate, Democrat or Republican, to vote against that. That, he has not been good on LGBT rights.
Or on abortion.
Or on, women's right to choose. So
he's
this is an extreme agenda. He's a kind person.
Oh, I'm sure.
If you talk to him and know him, but his policies are
scary.
They're really scary.
And I think that everyone who was born a woman or born of a woman should be concerned about women's issues. You don't have to be a woman to support those issues. Let me ask you about something you mentioned, though, in your talk about taxes. You talked about how the infrastructure needs to be supported. We have terrible infrastructure across America, but here in Connecticut, too. Are tolls the solution to that?
Well, I think in Connecticut, tolls are part of the solution, part of the solution. And I am funding every person. I'm funding Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, New York. The whole eastern seaboard has tolls. And I'm funding those states' infrastructure every time I drive through. Why aren't those citizens paying a share when they drive through Connecticut? Thousands and thousands of trucks drive through every day because we are an important corridor between New York and Boston, and we've got to make people pay their fair share for our infrastructure.
Would you support charging them more money than Connecticut residents?
Yeah, I'd support some kind of structure that gave a tax credit to Connecticut residents because there are ways to do that now with electronic tolling. But here's what I've learned in my years at the legislature. Everyone wants services. They want DDS to work. They want DMV to work. They want infrastructure. They want to make sure their parents have health care. They want to make sure that there are places to go as they age. But nobody wants to pay for any of it.
Let the other guy do it.
It's this fight between self-interest and the common good. And when you're constantly harping on taxes like the Republican candidate is, you're basically saying, think of yourself, worry about every penny. This is your money. It's that taxes are evil. And taxes can hurt our economy. We need to think about the structure of our tax system.
It needs to be fair.
And it needs to be fair, right. But you can't be sort of selling that all taxes are bad taxes, because again, Connecticut's great advantage is our education system. Without taxes, you don't have that. Our companies don't get the workers. The cuts that we made to higher ed, present company included, who voted for them, are really going to hurt us over the next 10 years if we don't find a way to improve what we're doing for our community colleges and state universities and UConn. Those cuts are going to be devastating.
I'm amazed that Connecticut is rated highest pay for all teachers across America, and yet it's still not a real wage. It's still not enough that teachers don't have to go to Staples and augment their own supplies, that they're not digging into their own pockets, they're not kicking into their own kitchen cupboards to bring food to kids who don't have enough. What can we do as far as supporting teachers? And I know this goes counter to conservatives who feel that we pay too much.
Yeah, oh my goodness, we do not pay nearly enough for teachers. You know, I'm married to a teacher, and when she's just retired.
You're the first same-sex couple in Connecticut to be married.
We are. And we are so lucky. We are just very lucky to have each other. But I watched her work from 5:30 a.m. until 10 p.m. every day during the school year. And in the summer, she's training, she's reading, you know, and it goes very quickly because they don't have that much time off. And she was valedictorian of her high school class. The salutatorian went to work for Microsoft. He quit working when he was 45 years old. And you know, has enough money forever. She who's given that incredible mind and spirit and energy to future generations, she does, you know, she did not make that much money, but she would say it's a good living wage. She tries to remind kids that they should want to be teachers. Not enough kids want to be teachers nowadays. So it's a living wage, but nobody's getting rich being a teacher in Connecticut.
No, and I can tell you from personal experience, having been married to a wonderful former journalist who left the business to get her degree at St. Joe's and to go into special ed and to change the lives of children in Newington and at Sedgwick and at King Philip, and my own children's lives. My daughter wants to be a teacher. And I think it's a testimony to any person. I couldn't do it. I've taught, but not as a classroom teacher. And I must say that it takes a special person to be a teacher. Speaking of schools, though.
Can I just get one other point in there?
What is that?
Which is just that part of this really is a gender issue, that, you know, teachers there's a proportion of women.
Oh, that's true.
And so they're not as highly paid. You know, like somebody building a road in Connecticut is paid a mandatory minimum. That's way more an hour than a teacher's paid, despite teachers needing a master's degree. So in the male-dominated industries, nobody seems to complain. You know, a police officer in general makes way more than a teacher and retires with more than a teacher and retires after 20 years. That's a male-dominated field. Teachers, obviously a mix, but I think
predominantly
it's more women than men. So I don't think, you know, in this whole Me Too movement and the conversation about Kavanaugh and who to believe, you cannot miss out on some of the gender differences and the gender sort of the power of men in our culture. And women are rising up now and saying enough. We need balance, we need fair pay, but it's a decades-long fight ahead.
Did you hear what Steve Bannon recently said?
Yeah.
He said that men should watch out because women are going to take over. I say, yeah.
50-50. I just want 50-50.
Oh, no, I'd be happy if we ran the world. Who runs the world? Speaking of schools, what I was going to ask you before is, there was a study. It's the Center for American Progress, nonpartisan policy institute. They looked at what kind of sex education was in the schools across the country. And they found that only 24 states mandated that their schools had safe sex education. And of those 24, only 8 mandated that they teach about consent. And here's the sad part. Connecticut's not one of them.
Right.
Now, you're an education specialist, plus you're in a committee, and you're devoted to early education. Why is Connecticut behind on this issue?
Well, I think in general, Connecticut, while we're progressive on certain things, we're not progressive in other ways. We are a land of steady habits. So it's hard to pass bills like that through the legislature because people say, I don't want government in my life being part of this part of education. So there's that balance. I do believe that some of the work being done in Connecticut on these issues will pass soon, particularly around consent. And I actually think consent starts in preschool. You said I'm an early childhood educator. You know, you teach kids when they're 3 years old that if someone tells you not to touch them, you don't touch them, that no means no. We all remember, you know, our parents' friends who would come in the house and tickle us and how awful that felt. And you couldn't say no, right? Whereas nowadays, I think parents are figuring out, and our preschool teachers and elementary schools are figuring out that this idea that no means no starts early to have the impact forever.
One of my daughter's friends made a joke. She said, if Kavanaugh doesn't get confirmed, someone's going to have the hard job of explaining to Judge Kavanaugh what no means. Here's the thing. We live in a land of Trump, an era of Trump right now. Basically, the president has said he's worried about young men. He's worried about unfair accusations. As a woman raising children, as a spouse, as a former teacher, and as a lawmaker, what do you have to say about the entire Me Too idea, and has it affected you personally?
I would say that I think our culture is really hard on boys. I think our culture is really hard on boys and girls. But in elementary school, I think we don't let boys move enough. You know, we tell them, you know, in general, boys have to move more than girls. I was one of those girls who had to move all the time. But so obviously, I'm being, you know, simplistic in my evaluation.
Well, everyone's different.
I don't think in high schools we have the kind of classes where kids can move and work with their hands and for the jobs that we need. I think our expectations of boys, that they can't cry, that they can't, you know, act like a girl in any way. I mean, people high up in government will say things, I've heard them say, like make fun of another man for wearing something that's feminine, like it's a big ha ha ha.
Or he cried like a girl.
Yeah, whatever it is. So I think boys have to live in this narrow band, like as a sort of tomboy growing up, if you will. I'm sure that's not a politically appropriate word, but whatever we say today, that's what they called me. That was okay. And then I could go excel in sports, and I got a lot of attention for it. I learned to be a leader. I played with the boys, no problem, right? I was on the boys' tennis team and cross-country team, and that all worked fine for me. But for boys who are more effeminate, or who wanted to be singing instead of playing football, they had a much harder time.
Yeah.
And I look at, you know, being in the gay community now, the horror stories from men who grew up gay compared to women. They're horror stories no matter what, because of the gender conforming nature of our culture. But I think that's because we're hard on boys, and we say, you have to be like this. And so, and they're supposed to be tough and gruff and dominant. And some of that leads to some of the challenges we're seeing with the Me Too movement. But, you know, I think boys and girls, we could, I'm a child development person, and I know schools always say we're research-based or data-based. And it cracks me up because anything you read about child development would say kids need to move, kids need to be outside. We know the kids' emotional health is better when they have brain breaks, this and that. And yet the schools are like this, with instructional minutes and, you know.
Middle school eliminates recess.
We don't have recess. How could we not have recess in middle school?
Stunned by that.
Now we have Annie Fisher at the farm where I work. I'm director at our farm. And those kids have an hour a day out on the field, in the woods, learning how to play. It's actually interesting. You watch from the beginning of the year even till now. They're just learning how to play because they've been on their technology. But with all that we know, why aren't we seeing a change? And I'm not saying, you know, there's certainly a lot of teachers and a lot of schools that go way out of their way to let kids move. But how do we make it part of our culture like it is in Finland and Scandinavia, really all over the world? We think that schools should be like widgets, like somehow they're factories turning kids out. That's not what they are. We've been a great, great nation with the best economy in the world because of all the difference. Because all schools weren't the same, and kids came together as they got older with all these different approaches and skills and ideas. As we homogenize, as you know, the state government or the federal government tries to homogenize schools, I think we lose a competitive edge for our economy.
And also there's a Braindraining Connecticut too. You're in the Committee of Higher Education, and I would say that one of the more effective commercials that Stefanowski, or at least his supporters has out there is that Connecticut is a state where people graduate and move out.
You know, I really take exception to that. I mean, I hope so. We have the best education in the world. And if my kids are going to New York City or Washington, D.C. to work, I mean, I have one daughter that's working on polling. That happens in D.C. We were watching the news when my wife was in the hospital, and there was someone from Conard High who was a Solicitor General for the United States. Guess what? They can't do that in Connecticut. It's a free country. It's a big country. We need to create an ecosystem where kids want to come back and come back when they want to, but we're a state this big. So like in Texas, to move out of Texas, you have to move how many hundreds of miles? Connecticut, you go 20 miles and you're in another state. So like I see my kids all the time. I have one in Chicago, I have one in New York, I have one in DC, and I have one in West Hartford. And they're all really happy young people. Guess when they come back to have kids? They come back because they want our schools, right? So you can't just look at what are they doing when they're 22. Where were you when you were 22?
I was in New York City.
Exactly. And I was in Boston. Kids like to be in cities where they don't need a car. And like, again, are we that simple as a state that we say, I want my kids to be just like me and come back to Connecticut right after college? No. We are a state that is exporting talent and importing talent. And one of the big challenges is immigrants are part of why our economy is so strong in Connecticut. And some of the new rules in DC are really going to hurt our economy. And all of New England depends on immigrants to keep population level because we're the most aging part of the country, because we're the oldest part of the country, and really things have opened up. But we can compete with anyone. We have more Fortune 500 companies in Connecticut than any state in the union per capita.
I've got 15 seconds left. Tell me the big issues, the three big issues on why people should vote for you and re-elect you and send you back to the state Senate.
Well, I think I've proven that I'm a leader you can count on. I know that I need to compromise and work across the aisle. And I believe in Connecticut. It's a great place, and I think there are things we can do as policymakers to help our companies, small businesses, move forward and create an improved economy.
For all Connecticut people, LGBT
for everyone,
included.
Everyone.
Yeah. And I know that you represent more than West Hartford, Bloomfield,
Burlington,
Farmington. And Farmington. Well,
I'll be in Farmington tonight.
I wish you lots of luck. Thanks for choosing to rise up. We're looking for special correspondents, and you can also find out more about Senator Beth Bye right here at lifeafterdawn.com. We'll see you next month, and until then, come on, rise up.